What was the best "you have no power here" moment you have ever seen? Part 1. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fucked up and the department manager, my name, was a total moron, and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said, "And my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. We had an HR lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him though the warehouse. Just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys, we don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over, and starts talking to me about my last vacation. How buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him, we knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and drug it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there bored as hell. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order, since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this bitch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs. And she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. Well, I feel a lot less original now, LMAO. I'm a college student, and last year we had a class about Congress in which part of the class was simulation-based. I got the idea to impeach our professor, and it soon became a bipartisan effort. Professor was pretty cool about it. When we submitted the articles, one of which included accusing him of murdering Jeffrey Epstein, he jokingly banged his fists on the table and called us all traitors. After the impeachment vote passed, the speaker told him, "The Senate will decide your fate," and he was in the loop enough to know that the acceptable response was, "I am the Senate." Edit. We did end up successfully removing him from office. Before these shenanigans started, I asked him casually who the VP was. You know, in case the Senate ends up in a tie vote. As a result, we already knew who his successor would be, in this case the TA. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there, and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants, which, in and of itself, is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the fuck he was doing here. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back, point to the door universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. I've got a similar story. Many years ago, we fired a salesperson. She was a compulsive liar and unethical as hell. She was also living under the delusion that the place would fall apart without her, and that we'd be begging her to come back in a couple of weeks. So it didn't sit too well with her when we hired her replacement. His first day on the job, she calls him up to cuss him out for stealing her job. Later that day, she called corporate. I understand their conversation went like this. That bastard's trying to steal my clients. He's going around town telling people he replaced me. Corporate, he did replace you. Harass him again or any other employees and we're calling the cops. That finally convinced her that we weren't going to be begging her to come back. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss, and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss. But he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him and he just starts unloading cursing, name-calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the fuck I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money if I'm busy being yelled at. I'm not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. In my professional experience, it is exceedingly rare to be fired by a client you don't want to fire you. I've worked at a law firm for only a few months, but yeah, every time a client has fired us, like 3 times, everyone at the office is like, "Oh, thank God." In my first apartment, my parents came to visit, and I said, "Fuck," when I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, "You can't talk like that in my ho," and stopped mid-sentence. My late mum went one better. She was staying at ours and I dropped a plate and said, "Fuck. Oops, sorry mom. It's your house, lad, but do you mind if I do?" "No, be my guest. Have I told you my new neighbors are cunts? I miss her." I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client, and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a dick. He would insult everybody working there and forced us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later, me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built, and they needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. Some random got manager, but I got assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day he was ordering the other cashiers around, then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same shit around, he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. I worked at a movie theater, and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, "Get the fuck out," and the customers went, "You can't say that. This isn't your theater, we're customers." Mall security guy promptly said, "This is my mall, and I can do whatever the fuck I want." New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet, and a lower-level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, "Show me the pass card, or you're not entering." Few days later, this worker got a bonus. Sometime in the late 80s, I worked at a Walmart warehouse. There was a strict rule: if you didn't have your security badge, you could not get in the front door. One day, just behind me, an older fellow gets stopped by LP for no badge. One of my friends pokes me and points out that the LP guy just refused to let Sam Walton in the door. Sam Walton is the founder of the Walmart. We all stopped to watch what we assumed was going to be a shit show. To his credit, Mr. Walton stops and goes back to his vehicle and gets his badge, and he thanked the LP guy for following the rules. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.